What is up, and welcome back to Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. As always, I am your host, Brandon Silvers. It is NFL playoff time, as is tradition with all sports. That means it is playoff power ranking time. Appreciate you being here. Do me a favor and subscribe if you have not already. Let's get into it. All right, for those of you who are new to my power rankings, I use a proprietary blend of stats, the eye test, matchups, recent play, and most importantly, vibes to put them together. As a result, some of it will look different than the current seeding, and some could look the same, but that is purely coincidental. And as with any proper power ranking, I will deliver it with 100% confidence, so much so that I'm ranking the wild card teams despite the fact that the games start on Saturday, and as you all know, this episode will drop Sunday morning. I did this with all 16 NBA playoff teams, and my number 2 and number 3 teams played each other in the finals, with number 2 winning. I also did this with the WNBA playoff teams, and my number 1 and number 2 teams played each other in the finals, with the number 2 team winning. Stephen A., McAfee, whoever, they ain't doing all that shit for all of these sports, so you are welcome. Okay, going from worst to first, starting with number 14, the Denver Broncos. Look, this team overachieved this year, 10-7 record, third best scoring defense in the NFL, and some of that was beating up on some weaker teams, but you have to play who's on your schedule. They can't help that. Nick Bonito had a breakout year on that end of the ball with 13.5 sacks. Speaking of breakout years, I watched Bo Nix play a decade of college football where he kind of seemed like one of those guys who would never have to pay for a meal in the towns where he went to college, maybe have a nice little career as a backup, but I was confused when he went 12th overall in this last year's draft. He shocked the hell out of me by winning the starting job, even though they don't have the best quarterback room there, but through the first quarter of the season, he kind of looked like the guy that I thought he would be. That is until the switch flipped. He ended up finishing with nearly 3,800 passing yards, 29 touchdowns to just 12 interceptions. He showed off his running ability and athleticism a bit with 4 rushing touchdowns. He even caught a touchdown pass. It looks like Denver very well may have found their quarterback of the future. Now, unfortunately, they're last in these power rankings, mostly due to the matchup. They have to go up against a buzzsaw of a Buffalo Bills team with probable MVP Josh Allen. Even worse, they have to play them in Buffalo, where the Bills are undefeated this season. And as good as their defense has been, they've struggled against the elite quarterbacks in the league. Joe Burrow just dropped 384 yards and 3 touchdowns on their heads a couple of weeks ago. Lamar Jackson had a perfect quarterback rating against them, including as many touchdown passes as incompletions. They obviously lost both of those games too. So while the future is bright and you get a mile-high salute for exceeding expectations this season, even though I do hate to see Sean Payton happy, it's going to end this weekend in Buffalo, where many hopes and dreams go to die. Moving on to number 13, the Houston Texans, one of the more promising teams heading into the season. CJ Stroud had an incredible rookie season last year, leading them to 10 wins and a wild card victory. They brought in offensive weapons, Stephon Diggs and Joe Mixon. They already had firepower on that side of the ball with Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and Dalton Schultz. They also play in the AFC South, which is a garbage heap. They seemed poised to take another step forward. But here they are, because they were basically stuck in neutral another 10-7 season. The offense took a step back as Stroud never really looked like himself. Some of that was probably due to injuries, as both Dell and Diggs are both on injured reserve. Mixon and Collins have been banged up and missed some time too. Just some tough luck for what was supposed to be an explosive offense. Defensively, they've been pretty good, near the top of the league in forcing turnovers, thanks in large part to Kalen Bullock and Derek Stingley Jr. intercepting a combined 10 passes on the year, and Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson do a great job at getting after opposing quarterbacks. But is this really a team you look at and expect to go far, or even survive their wild card matchup with the Chargers? I mean, it is at home in Houston, but the Chargers are oddly good on the road, and we'll talk more about their strengths later on. Even more damning for the Texans, they were just 1-5 against playoff teams this year. This is just not a team that's ready yet. They seem like they are over this season altogether. I think they're still on the right track, but this is where they belong. Now, those first two teams might not have necessarily been super surprising, but number 12 might be, at least based on their record. That's right. It is the Minnesota Vikings. Incredible year, going 14-3. Sam Darnold played absolutely out of his mind, throwing for 4,300 yards, 35 touchdowns, and just 12 interceptions. He seemed destined to play out the rest of his career as a backup, but then he had this season. Minnesota entered that last game against Detroit with a chance to earn a bye and home field advantage. They had won 9 in a row heading into that one. Unfortunately, they showed up and laid an egg, but hey, still a great season. They had a top 10 scoring offense and a top 5 scoring defense. They also have quite possibly the best receiver in the NFL in Justin Jefferson. They have a linebacker named Andrew Van Ginkel who came over from Miami and looks like a literal Viking who had a career year with 11.5 sacks. So why are they this low? Who's to say they don't regroup and go on another run? Well, for starters, I say it. That last game against Detroit was a great example of why I don't believe in them. Aaron Jones is their leading rusher. He averages 15 rushing attempts per game. Compare that to how they throw it 32 times per game with Darnold. That's a pretty big discrepancy considering as great as Darnold has been this season, he is not Joe Burrow. He still has some pretty big issues that crop up, especially when facing pressure, just like he did against the Lions. He started airmailing everything, finishing just 18 for 41 passing, 1 game sample size and all that, but completing just 44% of your passes is abysmal, especially when you have Justin Jefferson to throw to. And again, when he misses high, which means the ball is in the air longer, which is a great way to start throwing interceptions. Now their wild card opponent, the Rams, don't blitz nearly as much as the Lions do, or at least they haven't yet, but the book is out on Darnold, so that could change. And the thing is, you don't necessarily have to blitz that much to get him to make these mistakes. In their first matchup this season against the Rams, the Vikings had 2 opportunities to drive down the field and tie the game. The first, which started with just over 6 minutes left, opened up with a 25-yard pass play and a short run. After that, Darnold was sacked for a huge loss of 13 yards, and then what happened next? Incomplete pass followed by a punt. The final drive started deep in Vikings territory at their own 5-yard line with 1:46 left, still down by 8. First down, incomplete pass. Second down, Darnold is sacked for a safety, pretty much ending the game. That was a road game for them, and because they lost last week, this one will be a road game too, although they did move it to Glendale because of the LA Fires, but just another tough draw for a team that is already too reliant on a quarterback who's been walking a tightrope all year. I don't trust them, so here they are. Their ceiling could put them in the top half of playoff teams, but their floor has them down here. I think it's more likely that they find the floor. However, they do have a chance in the wild card, which is why their opponent, the Los Angeles Rams, are just 1 spot above them at number 11. A tough start, but they did win their last 5 games before resting their starters in the last game of the regular season. Their Week 14 win against Buffalo was a perfect example of the inconsistency that plagued them for most of the season. They were blowing them out, up 38-21 heading into the fourth quarter before the wheels fell off and they were holding on for dear life. Nothing really jumps out at you with them as a team, but they do look completely different when Puka Nacua is healthy and playing, going 8-3 in those games. Also, Kyren Williams had another fantastic year running the ball. Rookie linebacker Jared Verse also looks legit. But again, this isn't a team I'm expecting to go far. It's a coin flip in this wild card matchup with the Vikings like we just talked about. Slight edge to the Rams because they did win that game earlier this season and they're more balanced offensively. If they do win this week, though, then what? The winner has to go play the Lions. The Rams played them tough in week 1, but that felt like that was years ago. And of course, we just talked about how the Lions did the Vikings last week. So whoever survives this matchup is only delaying the inevitable. We've talked about this matchup enough. Let's keep it moving. Okay, number 10, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm going to go ahead and admit that I haven't known what to make of this team all season. They're 10-7, but they got there in the streakiest way possible. Started off winning 3 in a row, then they lost 2, then they won 5 in a row before losing, then they won 2 in a row before losing 4 straight to end the regular season. Mike Tomlin has been here since 2007, so we know what we're getting from teams he coaches. I've been watching the in-season Hard Knocks on the AFC North, and I'm not sure if there's another NFL coach who I'd want to play for more. Tomlin got that job way back when after an outstanding season as the Vikings defensive coordinator. You know what you get when you face his teams. They will almost always be defense first. This season has been no exception. They don't let you score a lot of points. The issue is when it comes to them scoring points. They managed to win games in spite of this to start the season, and some of the issues on offense could be chalked up to new quarterback Russell Wilson missing the start of the season due to injury. And they did manage to win some more as Russ worked himself into a rhythm after returning, but now they have a major problem that will get in the way of them making any real postseason noise. They've scored the fewest touchdowns of any playoff team. Russ cannot pass. He's averaging 171 yards passing in the last 5 games. His main weapon is George Pickens, who seems ready to speed run through Antonio Brown's career arc. Their running game isn't quite as good as the numbers would lead you to believe. They're skewed slightly higher from when Fields was starting at quarterback and using his legs to make things happen. If you need running back Najee Harris to run for 60 yards in a game, he's going to run for 60 yards. If you need him to carry the offense and run for 125 yards in a game, he's going to run for 60 yards. This is not an exaggeration. The past 3 seasons, Harris has run for 1,034 yards, 1,035 yards, and 1,043 yards. Those are per game averages of 60.8, 60.9, and 61.4. Simply put, they can't run the ball well enough to get a lead where they can just sit on it, and if they get behind, they can't throw it well enough to come back. This is not how you want to operate in the playoffs when you're trying to win a Super Bowl. Now, they're still up as high as they are because of how much I believe in Mike Tomlin's ability to win ugly, but I don't believe in it that much. Their first opponent is Baltimore. They beat them earlier this year, but most recently they got blown out a couple of weeks ago as the Ravens offense did everything the Steelers offense couldn't. If they happen to pull off a miracle and beat Baltimore again, they will most likely have to face the Bills. Who would you bet on in that one? Exactly. So they're here at number 10, followed up by the Green Bay Packers at number 9. On paper, the Packers are a very good team. Unfortunately, most of their team is also made out of that very same paper. Their star defensive back Jair Alexander is out for the season unless they somehow manage to make the Super Bowl. Wide receiver Christian Watson tore his ACL in the last game of the regular season after having a career year. Jordan Love should play, but has an injured elbow, so who knows how effective he's going to be. Which is a real shame because they managed to put together a nice little season. They survived an earlier injury to Love to win 11 games after winning just 9 last season. Offensively, Josh Jacobs did Josh Jacobs things, Jaden Reed did Jaden Reed things, and Tucker Kraft broke out at tight end. They were a couple of breaks away from competing for the division crown in the gauntlet that is the NFC North. But this is just how it goes sometimes. Very bright future if everyone who's hurt can get back right and continue on this path. Not this year, though. Number 8 is a team that also has a very bright future, the Washington Commanders. They started off hot, but they had a mid-season swoon that coincided with rookie sensation Jaden Daniels getting hurt, but they picked up right where they left off when he got healthy again and won 5 in a row to end the season. The more comfortable he got and the more they opened up the playbook for him, the better the team looked. Offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury has designed the offense around Daniels' dual threat ability and taken them from 25th in scoring last season to 5th this year. Not bad. Terry McLaurin is one of the most underrated receivers in the NFL, just wrapped up his 5th straight 1,000-yard season and topped it off by nearly doubling his career high in touchdown catches with 13. Obviously, I love talking offense more than defense, but their defense also took an impressive leap. They're middle of the pack there after being terrible last season. They do all right against the pass. They can give up some yards on the ground, though, but they're kind of like that bend but don't break type of a defense. A hell of a turnaround in Dan Quinn's first season as head coach. Remember, this team was 4-13 last year. They do get a tough matchup in the wild card with Tampa Bay, but they could win it. From there, it would be the Eagles, who they split 2 games with in the regular season, winning the last matchup in Week 16, or the Packers, who we just talked about. Both are winnable matchups. My biggest concern is I have RG3 PTSD. Another Heisman-winning black dual-threat quarterback who had an amazing rookie season for Washington before blowing out his knee in the playoffs. Now he spends his time trying to prove Rob Parker right and posting pics of himself going full Nancy Reagan on croissants. I don't think this will actually happen to Jaden, but unlike RG3 on the croissant, I'm not ready to go all in yet. Also, this is not quite a Super Bowl contending team this year. Give them some time. All right, number 7 is their opponent, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A couple of years ago, I was helping this Cuban restaurant get up and running, painting, doing all kind of stuff like that. One day, they had this coffee guy come in to calibrate their espresso machine for Cuban coffee. I love coffee. It's awesome. So when they asked me to be the taste tester, I was all about it. Now, I'd heard of Cuban coffee before this, but I wasn't especially familiar with it. I just figured it was a different type of roast, maybe had some mojo in it. I didn't know. Anyway, the coffee guy's just handing me these tiny ass cups full of Cuban coffee, and I'm tossing them back and letting them know what I think, one after another. And finally, one of the co-owners comes over and he looks at what I've done and he's like, "Bro, what the fuck? You drank all those?" Hell yes, I drank all those. Why wouldn't I? They were tiny cups of coffee, except they weren't. They were full-size servings of Cuban coffee, which apparently is made out of crack cocaine. About 15 minutes later, my vision was vibrating and I was seeing the colors that Young Dro used to rap about, which is pretty much how I feel watching the Bucs play, which is fitting since Tampa claims to have invented the Cuban sandwich. Doesn't matter what happened the previous play, what might happen next, who's down the field, Baker Mayfield is going to sling the ball down there. I mean, honestly, it worked out pretty well. Sure, he did tie for the league high with 16 interceptions, but he also threw 41 touchdowns, which was tied for second most, so you'll take it. That was a career high for him. He has all the makings of one of those quarterbacks that leads a team to a Super Bowl, and you talk about it down the road like, damn, Baker Mayfield was the starting quarterback for a Super Bowl team? Which sounds disrespectful, but it's way better than the how the hell didn't Dan Marino win a Super Bowl conversation. In all scenarios, be the guy who won the Super Bowl. So they were super chaotic. They only won 10 games, but if you take a closer look, they had 5 losses where the final margin was just 1 possession. Now, whether that's bad luck, not knowing how to close, or some combination of both, I don't know, but I think teams have to go through that to learn how to win. It seems to have paid off because they also managed to close the season super strong, winning 6 of their last 7. Everyone is chasing the Lions in the NFC, but Tampa Bay has the firepower offensively to do it, to keep up with them, especially with Mike Evans healthy and looking like himself again. This is a team that could lose in the wild card game or win the Super Bowl. Now, would I bet on them to win the Super Bowl? No, but this is the first team on the list where it feels like a real possibility. Just to prove that I'm not completely biased towards offenses, even though I am, the number 6 team is the Los Angeles Chargers, due in large part to the strength of their defense. Jim Harbaugh rolled into town in his khakis and said, "Let's bore the other team to death," and it's working. They gave up the fewest points in the NFL this year after ranking 24th in scoring defense last season. A tough defense combined with an ability to win on the road, which they have done going 6-3, is a formula for a team to win a Super Bowl based on what every old coaching cliche has taught me. And look, I haven't gone insane. It's not all about the defense, and Harbaugh hasn't quite made the offense as boring as I know he'd love to, in large part because he has Justin Herbert at quarterback. In 504 passing attempts, he's thrown just 3 interceptions. Now, if you haven't watched him play, you might think that this is because Harbaugh has him playing like Chad Pennington, but Herbert actually takes shots down the field. The issue and my main concern for them is who he's throwing to. Ladd McConkey, the rare person whose name sounds like a slur for people who look like him, was his leading receiver this year. Don't get me wrong, he's been very good this year, especially for a rookie. But then it gets ugly. Quentin Johnson can be a monster like he was the final game of the season, but he's also been plagued by drops this year. Outside of that, they kind of cobble together targets for guys you don't know. And then their rushing attack is merely serviceable when compared to other top contenders. With the ceiling being so low for their offense, they have to be perfect there and defensively. But it is possible, and even though it's been a while, Harbaugh has been to the Super Bowl before. So maybe it's the coaching cliches that got me, but while I can't quite see it, I also can't not see it. whatever the fuck that means. Okay, number 5, the Philadelphia Eagles. On the strength of having Saquon Barkley alone, they should be able to make the Super Bowl. As you know, he ran for 2,000 yards in his first year with the team, and he was hurdling people backwards. Good job by the Giants not paying him. You know the Eagles can run the ball, whether it's him or Jalen Hurts. They were second in both rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. That went a long way towards helping them be the 7th best scoring offense in the NFL. When it comes to passing, I feel like Hurts is a little bit too reliant on whether or not A.J. Brown is open, especially when he has Devontae Smith too, who's also super talented. But it's worked out well because A.J. Brown is awesome, and that means Hurts doesn't really throw a lot of picks. And Philadelphia isn't some one-dimensional offensive juggernaut. No, they are great at defense too. Fewest yards allowed, second fewest points allowed, 6th in forced turnovers, a huge improvement on last year's team that was 30th in points allowed. They've got hoopers on that end of the ball too. With a resume like this, how are they not higher? Sure, they can win a Super Bowl, but what's the problem? Well, I've watched a fair amount of Eagles games this year, and I always come away wondering what the hell they're doing and how did they manage to win? That's the sign of a coaching problem. So yeah, Nick Sirianni, you're not it. Decision-making, play calling, clock management, all subpar, especially for a team with the hopes that the Eagles have. It's like they win in spite of themselves. I don't trust teams like that to go far in the playoffs, so here they are. We've had bad offenses win Super Bowls, terrible starting quarterbacks, crazy people, defenses that aren't great, but how many coaches whose default look is befuddled have won a Super Bowl? Now, I could be forgetting someone, so comment below or message me, but I imagine if I am, the list is still very, very short. Plus, word is that Sirianni and Hurts don't get along, and that head coach quarterback relationship is super important. So if that's missing, I don't know what to tell you. And it's not like Hurts is Willie Beeman. He looks like he warms up to a self-curated playlist of Joe's greatest hits. He looks like the Dr. Jekyll to Shamar Moore's Soul Train hosting Mr. Hyde. How embarrassing to have him hate you. That will certainly blow up at some point in the playoffs and lead to Sirianni being shown the door. Okay, the 5th, 6th, and 7th teams in this ranking could win a Super Bowl, but they'd need a Cinderella run. Starting here, these are the teams that can go out and just win it without shocking the world. At number 4, we have the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson just wrapped up his best season as a passer, career highs in yards with 4,172, touchdowns with 41, and a career low interceptions during a full season of starting with just 4. Remember when they didn't think he could play quarterback? That's why I will never be embarrassed about a wrong take, because none of my takes can be that wrong. For some reason, other teams let the Ravens get Derrick Henry, who just ran for over 1,900 yards and 16 touchdowns. As you can imagine, Baltimore's offense was pretty good, putting up 30.5 points per game, which was 3rd in the NFL. Zay Flowers had an awesome year, but he's hurt, unfortunately. He might come back later. In the meantime, Rashad Bateman and old reliable Mark Andrews should see more looks from Lamar. I also expect Lamar to use his legs more. He ran for 900 yards in the regular season, and I don't know how you defend a read option with him and Derrick Henry. They aren't as dominant on defense as they were last year, but still a top 10 scoring defense. They're number 1 against the run, but they give up a lot of yards through the air. Some of that is them getting in shootouts. Some of it is them blowing teams out and forcing them to sling it to come back. They also don't force a ton of turnovers, and they have this issue where they lose games they have no business losing. It's like they get bored or they lose focus, and whoops, game's over. You can't do that in a format where it's win or go home. But they're here because I do think this is a Super Bowl caliber team. They just have a few more question marks than the teams ahead of them, but we're talking about a matter of degrees here. At number 3, the team the Ravens would face in the next round, the Buffalo Bills. They rested everyone the last game of the regular season, but they won 10 of 11 before that, with the only loss being that incredible 44-42 game against the Rams, where they almost overcame a 17-point fourth quarter deficit. Okay, what stats do I love? Scoring offense. They were 2nd at 30.9 points per game. I also love scoring defense. They were 11th. On top of that, I love quarterbacks. Josh Allen will probably win MVP this season. He threw for 28 touchdowns, ran for 12 more, threw just 6 interceptions, which is something that's plagued him in the past, and he's done this without a true number 1 receiver. They did bring in Amari Cooper midseason, but they don't quite have that connection yet. Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and Mac Hollins were all okay for him. They have 2 tight ends with the same initials that I always confuse in Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, who are also okay options. But Allen carries them. Speaking of carries, James Cook doesn't get a ton of them, but he makes the most of the ones he does get. He tied for first with 16 rushing touchdowns. Between the 2 of them, their ground game is good. While their defense isn't overwhelming, they do force a lot of turnovers. Unlike the Ravens we just talked about, they are 3rd in that department with 32, including 16 fumble recoveries, which is tied with Pittsburgh for first. So, great offense led by an elite quarterback paired with a solid defense that forces turnovers is a recipe for a Super Bowl. The only reason they aren't ranked higher is they most likely have to get through both Baltimore and Kansas City to make the Super Bowl, and Kansas City has had their number in the postseason. Of course, Kansas City has had a lot of teams' numbers in the postseason recently, which is a big reason why we still haven't talked about them yet. Spoiler alert. But Buffalo does feel like they have a real shot this year. They look different. They did beat the Chiefs in the regular season. They beat the Lions. If they didn't have all of their history and baggage, we'd believe. But they do, so they're still behind a couple of teams, starting with number 2, the Detroit Lions. First of all, if you're my age, and I just turned 36 January 11th, so subscribe to this and my blog, the show notes, if you need to get me a gift. But if you're my age, the fact that the Lions are on any playoff ranking is incredible. They've been so bad throughout my lifetime that they drove not 1 but 2 generational players into an early retirement. But now, not only are they in the playoffs, but they're a legitimate threat to win the Super Bowl after a 15-win regular season. Let me tell you, I am all in on Dan Campbell as a head coach. He played tight end in the NFL, and when you look at him and you listen to him a bit, he seems like one of those old school smash mouth football coaches. That's the era he played in, so it kind of makes sense. But guess what? Couldn't be further from the truth. He is ridiculously aggressive with his decision-making all the time. If it's 4th and short from pretty much anywhere on the field, he's going for it, and he's most likely using some wacky school playground-ass play where some offensive lineman throws a screen pass to a long snapper, and they somehow manage to complete it. This is a man who saw the Little Giants run the annexation of Puerto Rico and got inspired. Clearly, this is a segment dedicated to my audience of a certain generation. Anyways, I think this level of aggressiveness from a coach instills confidence in a team. He's like, I believe in y'all to make this happen, and if you don't, then I believe in y'all to limit the damage for it not happening, and more often than not, it's worked out. Scared money don't make no money, fortune favors the bold, however you want to say it, you have to get out there and not play scared, and Dan has the Lions do that. Now, it helps if you're also really talented and execute well, and Detroit checks both of those boxes. They have the best offense in the league, averaging 33 points per game, led by Jared Goff, who has been much better than public perception over the course of his career, and he just had a monster season of 4,600 yards passing, 37 touchdowns, and just 12 interceptions. They have not 1 but 2 1,000-yard receivers in Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams, and then they have the 2023 draft class, quite possibly the most useful draft class I've ever seen, which is largely responsible for them going from a fun, exciting playoff team last year to a Super Bowl contender this year. Starting with Jahmyr Gibbs, one of the most dynamic running backs in the game today, 1,400 yards rushing, 16 touchdowns, another 500 yards and 4 touchdowns receiving. Explosive player. And here's what's crazy. He was only credited with 4 starts this year. That's right. Technically, David Montgomery is the starter. And guess what? He's pretty good too. He's a little banged up, but they do expect him to return. He had nearly 800 yards to go along with his 12 rushing touchdowns. Another 2023 draftee, Sam Laporta, has been a reliable tight end from the jump. Another 60 catches, 700 yards or so, 7 touchdowns, as they give Goff all kinds of weapons to throw to. Then on the defensive side of the ball, 2 more 2023 draft picks. You got linebacker Jack Campbell, who's been fantastic all season long and came up huge in that last game against the Vikings. He led them in combined tackles this year. And then you've got defensive back Brian Branch, who led them in solo tackles this year and also had 4 interceptions. For as explosive as their offense is, they also have a big play defense. Kirby Joseph led the NFL with 9 interceptions. They allowed the 7th fewest points in the NFL. And even without Aiden Hutchinson, they blitz a ton. Both sides of the ball, they are my favorite team to watch. I think they match up well with every potential opponent in the playoff. If you don't value experience a ton, then this is probably the Super Bowl favorite. However, I do. So that's why the number 1 team in my NFL playoff power rankings is the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, on the surface, yeah, no shit. Best record in the NFL, 7 straight seasons of 11 or more wins, all that with Patrick Mahomes as the starting quarterback, 3 Super Bowl rings in that time period, including the last 2. They are the 1990s Chicago Bulls, so of course, they're number 1 entering this postseason. However, the weird thing about them this season is that I can't really explain why they're good in football terms. I mean, yes, Mahomes is still Mahomes, and their defense is still really good, but nothing really wowed me about them this year other than the fact that they could not lose. It almost seemed like they got bored with the regular season and tried to see how hard they could make it on themselves. I do believe winning is a skill, so it could be as simple as they just know how to win even when things aren't clicking, but it also could be some form of black magic or maybe Taylor Swift's publicist Tree Payne. I don't know. What I do know is that until someone finally knocks them off, they are number 1. I don't care how raggedy they look. I don't care if Mahomes is throwing to receivers who should be playing for the Scottish Claymores. I don't care if Travis Kelce works himself into shape by cosplaying as LMFAO with his brother. The Kansas City Chiefs are my Super Bowl favorites until further notice. All right, that will do it. This has been another episode of Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. Appreciate you watching, listening, rating, subscribing, reviewing, and sharing. Don't forget to check out my blog, The Show Notes, where I give you the best weekly sports watch guide in the world. Link is down below in the literal show notes. Hope you have a fantastic week, and I will catch you later.